LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
Johnny, you rosin up your bow and play your fiddle hard, 'cause hell's broke loose in Georgia and the devil deals the cards.
We are the Uprising.
Welcome back to the Uprising, a podcast of LibertyNation.com. I'm your host, Scott Cosenza, and joining me today is LibertyNation.com's senior political analyst, Mr. Timothy L.T. Donner. Tim, welcome back to the show.
And thank you so much. Always fun to be here.
And I will add that I am also the legal affairs editor, as it happens, for the aforementioned sponsor of the show.
Or as I like to refer to you as the illegal affairs
yes.
editor.
And so I am, compared to the average Joe on the street, perhaps more qualified to speak to the Trump indictments from Georgia, and that's what we will be concerning ourselves with.
I would certainly hope today. So. You're being paid a small fortune to analyze these things.
It is a small fortune, Tim. I will agree with you.
Okay. You agree with half of the description. Yeah.
And, I came to the table today, or was going to come to the table today, Tim, loaded for bear against Fani Willis, who is the Fulton County District Attorney who has indicted Donald Trump on multiple felonies for ruining my week and a trip that was going to be to the city of brotherly love, Tim, to see Mr. Bruce Frederick Springsteen in concert with, at least before the show and after, with my cousin Ned, who is perhaps the biggest of the Uprising fans of my cousins. And as you know, I have many who listen, and I appreciate all their listenership.
Well, I always thought the idea of the podcast was smart because just your network of cousins would provide sufficient listenership and viewership to justify such an undertaking. As they like to say on Broad Street.
But Mr. Springsteen got sick and canceled his show, so I didn't have that to complain about. But boy, she did keep me up until 2 a.m. so that I could file for LN with this massive RICO indictment of Donald Trump.
Well, the thing is, you need to make clear that you were going to the Springsteen concert partly because of the music, but also in support of the cause, to show you're down with the cause of Springsteen's a progressive ideology, which of course you must support because you spend ridiculous amounts of money to see the guy perform. So obviously it's implicit that you support his entire political ideology.
He's such a hypocrite, by the way, with those prices. He really took, I think, a significant beating to his reputation, and not from people like me who are libertarian or conservative who appreciate Springsteen, and there are many of us. I guess, are we going to call Chris Christie a conservative? Anyway, Chris Christie's a huge fan, as well as other,
But he has to be. He was the governor of New Jersey.
No, but he's actually a super fan. He goes to tons of shows. He's known as being a big time fan.
So he's
but the last time I saw Springsteen,
the real deal.
I paid nothing because my sister, who I don't believe listens to the podcast, gave me as a present a gift of tickets, which was fabulous. And believe it or not, how it works with, and I guess we're going on a full on tangent here, how it works with ticket prices for people who don't know. I'll give some of my wealth of experience here. If you see a show that is very well attended and the prices are astronomical, the way you can beat that is go to a show in a city that is a little less popular, perhaps, than another. So don't go to Manhattan. Go to Syracuse.
Go to Philadelphia.
Okay. Well, Philly too, but I was going to say Syracuse for you. But in any case,
okay, sure enough,
they and you go on a school night, and you don't buy a ticket before the show. You buy your ticket at the show, and there are, at a big event space, there are always a sufficient quantity of people who thought they could make that show 6 months prior when it came, when the show was on sale, that now can't or don't or won't make it to the show. And you can slip in usually for a few bucks. But in any case.
Okay, so what you're doing here essentially as you're promoting the entire scalping industry through your
I'm not even going to
promotion of the scheme.
We're not going to get on another tangent, or I would talk about your scalping experiences, which are the focus of another podcast.
Yes,
yeah, indeed,
that's true. We could do a whole show on that.
Ned is actually
it's that much fun.
Traveling through right into the Bermuda Triangle as we record. Did the internet just completely do away with the Bermuda Triangle stories? Is that why we don't hear them anymore? You remember that? Like he said he was going to Bermuda, and I thought, oh, watch out for the triangle. And I thought, nope. If you're under 40 years old, do you even know what that means?
Well, you know what happened to us, don't you?
No. In the Bermuda Triangle?
Yes. I didn't even really put it together at the time, but we went to Bermuda for the marriage of my mother-in-law. My father-in-law had passed many years before. She was getting remarried. We went to Bermuda for the wedding. Small gathering, 6 or 7 of us. And on the plane, on the way back from Bermuda to the mainland, one of the engines stalled. Fortunately, there were 2 engines.
Right.
One engine, we saw smoke coming out
like a movie, right? Sure.
The left side of the windows on the left.
Was there like a werewolf?
That can't be. And I looked at Lisa, my wife, and I said, that can't be what it appears to be, can it? And like 2 minutes later, the pilot gets on and goes, well, we have a problem with the left engine, but not to worry. We have the right engine functioning fine. And we're going to U-turn back to Bermuda, which they did. But that was in essentially the Bermuda Triangle.
Right.
And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, as you know, but that's a fact that it happened, and it happened there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned your mother-in-law. She would have been a big fan of the podcast. No longer with us, rest in peace.
Definitely.
But let's go ahead and turn our attention back to the issues in the news, Tim, and the indictment by Fani Willis of Mr. Donald J. Trump. It is remarkable that the immediate past president, as I like to say, of the United States of America has now been criminally indicted for the 4th time, 2nd time in state court, New York, Georgia now, 2 federal indictments, 1 in D.C., 1 in Florida.
Plus the civil case from E. Jean Carroll.
Well, yes, but that's the
okay. But these are criminals.
Sued civilly, all the time, and so I don't think that's that big. It's not as remarkable nearly as these other charges. Now, unlike I think that this is the most nakedly political of the indictments. I think Ms. Willis is clearly not a serious prosecutor, and that was revealed during her 11:48 p.m. By the way, I'm a victim of that. Okay, I listened. I was ready to file my piece discussing the forthcoming indictments at like 6 p.m. when they started talking about like, oh, they're holding over the grand jury. I had to listen to CNN for 5 hours. That happened to me. I had to do that. Okay, I'm just saying. I want a little bit of victim. Well, somebody should be. I should get like a fruit basket or something.
Okay,
what I had to go through.
Okay, I've got a solution. I'm going to pass along the fruit cake that's left over from Christmas
from that Bermuda trip. Oh,
might as well have been.
Right.
It's about that hard. So, as if it had been first sent 25 years ago, like most fruit cakes.
Ms. Fani Willis said that she would endeavor to try the case within 6 months and with all 19 defendants together. Now, for anybody who doesn't understand, it's not going to happen that way, and it's not a debatable point. It's not like, well, maybe they could rent out the Superdome for 3 months and try everybody. There is no 19 defendant trial going to happen. If you think of each of the defendants, and of course there won't be 19 because some will plead out and blah, blah, blah. Some will maybe be dropped. But let's just say hypothetically they were 19 going to trial. Well, you're talking about how many people will each of those, they'll all have their own teams, right? So it'll be like a couple, 3 lawyers per defendant times 19. By the way, like a tech and an evidence presentation expert for each of the teams. 19 objections, separate objections to each thing. Like it's so impossible.
It's a circus within a circus.
Except that it's not a circus because it'll never happen. It's an imaginary thing. It is fictitious, which is a funny word because I guess we're going to jump around a little bit. Earlier in the day, the clerk, Ms. Shay Alexander, who makes a couple $100,000 a year from the taxpayers there, misfiled a document sheet that identified what the charges were going to be against Donald Trump. And really, there was a great civics lesson in all this. It's actually perfect for me to talk about and for us to present as LibertyNation.com stories because of the civics lesson. It really is. What they published was this like wish list of charges that the grand jurors would vote on, and every single one was as the grand jurors charged. Now, do you know what happens, Tim, if you are on a murder trial and you're a juror on that murder trial, and let's say you have to go for an emergency appendectomy one day during trial? What happens to the trial?
You mean mistrial?
Well, no, I'm asking, do you have, so okay, you don't know. So what would happen is they would either appoint an alternate juror or they would
they have like a pool of alternate jurors.
They would more commonly, in the example I gave of an emergency appendectomy, they would just suspend the trial for 24 or 36 hours in order for you to convalesce enough to be able to go sit back in the jury box, if that's how long it would take.
Right.
And the reason why is because you need to hear all those bits of evidence and all the testimony and all the argument presented in order to render a verdict that's a valid verdict. In a grand jury room, if you have to go have an appendectomy or attend to some other need, they don't stop the grand jury proceedings. In other words, it's not important for you to hear all the evidence because if you hear enough evidence to say that you're going to vote for the criminal indictment, there's no counter evidence produced or presented. Right. There is no defense offered.
This is, look, I really appreciate the fact that you hammered away at the grand jury system in your coverage of this on LibertyNation.com because I think it's very instructive. Let me put it this way. If the founders made any mistakes, I think the one that I would point to is their confidence in the grand jury system as a fair way to bring people under indictment because it has turned into nothing more than a one-sided show. Look, wait.
It's not that it's turned into a one-sided show. It's not that it's turned into a one-sided show. It's that it's literally been turned on its head with now instead of a protection for the people, which is why a grand jury is there. The purpose of a grand jury. Let me just finish the one point, which is if you miss a grand jury proceeding, they still vote because all a grand jury is if I'm the prosecutor, I get to call in 1 million witnesses if I want to and say, Joe Bag of Donuts over there is an awful person. And Joe Bag of Donuts doesn't get to call any witnesses to say that he's a cool person or not a bad person. And so if all you have is a one-sided attack on someone delivered by a skilled advocate, it's a wonder that anybody doesn't get indicted. But the purpose of the grand jury was to say,
you can't just go ahead and charge anybody.
A criminal trial is
a hearing among their peers.
Such a burden. A criminal trial is such a burden, and jeopardy attaches, meaning you may have to go to prison for the rest of your life. So we're going to make sure that no wild prosecutor does this. So what we'll do is we'll make sure the people weigh in and say it's okay for the prosecutor to subject another member of our society, our neighbor, to this process. But instead, what we have, of course, is the grand jury doesn't do a damn thing. What happens is a prosecutor spoon feeds them information that they want, And then later on, when they think they have enough to get their wish, they say, please charge X, Y, and Z, which is what that sheet was published, that sheet that the clerk published.
Plus, it seems to me that the bar is so low for indictment, too, that, because I'm sure that in these grand jury proceedings, which are all sealed, that, all private, not open to public scrutiny, that the prosecutor will say, you're not voting to convict someone here. You're simply voting on whether it's legitimate to indict them.
Yeah.
And so the people, I think if I was on a grand jury, I would say, well, I mean, it seems like it's worthy of running through the court system, right? Because the bar is pretty much so low.
Well, you don't have
getting no countervailing arguments.
You're actually thinking about it in a level that's a little different than I would put in the juror's mind. To me, but it's in the same universe, which is if you sentence someone to serious prison time, or if you vote to convict someone of a crime where there is serious prison time attached to that conviction, I would hope that it would give you immeasurable pause and reflection on before saying, yes, let's put our neighbor in a cage, right? It's a lot less of a reach to say, yeah, there's enough to go to trial there, especially, by the way, like you think the average grand jury member, do you think they visit libertynation.com or do you think that they've been living under a veil of censorship from stories that go counter to the mainstream narrative,
Yeah.
They may not even have a clue that there's any pushback against the notion that Donald Trump is a Nazi or some ogre, right? So it may be just natural for them to say, yeah, of course. Take him to trial. But this
right. I mean, if in doubt, sure, go ahead, try him. Because if he's not guilty, then the jury will
they'll sort it out.
The trial jury will figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. It's too easy. And that's what I mean by if the founders knew how this would be. Well, as we've often said here, it's turned out not to be what they designed, and not what they designed, but actually the opposite of what they designed the grand jury system to be. I understand the intent, and the intent was true, but they also had an understanding of human nature. And I guess this is another one of those reasons that no less than Thomas Jefferson said he had little, if any, confidence that the system that they devised would last more than a generation.
One of the things that the founders did, and if you study their work, it's remarkable. We were joking, I think, before we started recording today about, if you hear somebody called like a community organizer, like they're almost certainly a liberal and they're not a conservative or libertarian. Right. And the same thing is true. You hear like power to the people. That's a lefty, progressive-y kind of thing. But the founders of our country really did believe in the power to the people. And at every turn, when you look at their work and what they did was they wanted the people to have the power. So I was just saying to you, Tim, it's our fault. It's the people's fault for not, making sure that we keep these processes as
a republic. If you can keep it, we're not keeping it.
Yeah. This woman, Shay Alexander, who's the clerk who posted this thing, then here's why it's like, if you screw up, okay, you screwed up. No big deal. So she screwed up by posting this thing. It didn't, by the way, prejudice Donald Trump's legal case. There was some talk I heard from other people and on Twitter about like, this would be grounds for a mistrial. It's not grounds. I'm just telling you right now, that mistake of her posting that stuff is a 0-0 burger for Donald Trump to get any kind of defense, of these charges. It has nothing to do with it.
Well, look, let me give you from a political standpoint, the first obvious tip-off to me that these people don't know what they're doing is the fact that she held this press conference at 11:38 in the evening. Nobody does that. If you have something, and the whole purpose of it was to be high profile, you don't release it at 11:38 at night. You release it during the day for it to be covered on the evening news and into subsequent news cycles. So that shows the clumsiness of them. But I think the other thing that stood out to me was, I think the attitude of this woman who just threw everything against the wall, figuring some of it might stick, all these charges against all these people, all really pressing the edges of the maximum sort of interpretation of the statutes involved, is that she was working on this for 2 years. And her attitude was kind of like, I've been doing this for 2 years, damn it. I'm going to get my moment in the sun. And so she's had it, but it was not in the sun. It was in the moonlight.
She's already won for her political future.
For her purposes, she's already won.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. In other words, she doesn't need the trial. She doesn't need the win at trial or conviction.
The left isn't going to say, oh, we'll ostracize you because you didn't win. Instead, they'll say, hey, you're down with the cause.
A professor
you did
of
what
law
you needed to do.
At any law school she wants to be. She'll be a leader of any lefty org. They will. I mean, she's a hero. She's already fait accompli, hero status of the. You know,
what does she really care about the outcome?
Yeah.
You know, does she really care? If
by the way, her county is, I think, the second. I know there's a little bit of a debate of like the second or whatever most reliable Democrat county in the country. 2 times in the last 100 and some odd years, they voted for a Republican. And it wasn't about the Republican, it was about the Democrat who was running. And Biden carried over 70% of the votes, which is, you know, that's a lot to get that high.
Certainly, you're not suggesting that the indictment had anything to do with a certain jury pool that would hate Donald Trump. I mean, you're not suggesting that.
You know, I wasn't suggesting it, but I'm glad you mentioned it because that's an important point. I think why so many have glee over these charges more so than other ones. Actually, what I was thinking of, Tim, is she serves at the pleasure of the people. And if she had a more competitive district to serve, I don't know that we would see this kind of prosecution.
Exactly.
Because she doesn't have to worry about her future in that.
Well, think about Alvin Bragg. How many people in Manhattan are you going to get to stand up for Trump? Right. It's the easiest indictment you could ever get in a system that, again, let's repeat it, a system where it's not even difficult to indict a ham sandwich.
Yeah. You mentioned Bragg, and I wanted to make a note, too, in terms of how the different cases are. Ms. Fani Willis is not the attorney that you want to tangle with from a defense perspective. If it's truthfully stated, and it may not be because people do pad these things, but she said in her bio, I read a bunch of, publications from her office as I was reporting on her, and she says she has over 100 felony criminal trial cases to jury verdict, which is if you were interviewing a criminal defense attorney who said they had 100 jury trials to verdict, felony trials, I would say hire that person. They've seen it all. They, whether they're good or not, we don't know, but boy, they're not going to be surprised by something, or that is as seasoned as it gets. Unlike, I think, what's the New York guy, Bragg, the braggart in New York, who he's a politician.
He's
a
over
guy. He's not
over his head.
He's not a retail workaday prosecutor who knows how to make some sausage, out of the law like she is. So Trump, this is a worse one for him. Now I don't know that this prosecution will stay in state court, as I wrote about on the pages of the sponsor of today's podcast, Tim, LibertyNation.com, the people's choice for news and analysis 24/7, 365. There's a federal law that allows for certain high officials in the federal government, if they're sued in state court, to remove that case to federal court. Donald Trump was president of the United States at the time of the alleged acts in furtherance of the conspiracy and the birth of the conspiracy. And we're going to talk about the RICO nature of these charges in a moment. And And so he's entitled to have this case removed to federal court. In fact, LibertyNation.com's managing editor, Mark Angelides, actually sent me something while we were recording that indicated maybe Mr. Meadows will be trying to get this done too. But if you were a part of the government, the federal government at the time, the acts arose that caused you to be charged in state court, you may be able to take that to federal court, which would mean, by the way, Tim, instead of the single county that is, wildly Democratic in its voting history and presumably judgment about Donald Trump, you get 45 counties, and a lot, like if it's like every other city in America, the conservatives are the ones that first, strike out for the burbs and the exurbs, right? So that'll help Trump if that happens. And also, I think that you see the way these Atlanta politicians in their justice system play fast and loose with things. The federal system's a little bit more rigorous with that. Not devoid of politics and everything else, but it's just you expect to see a good deal less of it in the federal system rather than the state system. So I think we'll see Trump do that, and we'll see them fight. That's another reason why there's not going to be a trial in 6 months. Like that alone is going to take.
Do you think that there will be any of the 4 criminal indictments? Do you think any of them will come to trial ultimately before the 2024 election? And if so, which?
Okay. I am not a trial attorney, so we have to say that to start. But if you said to me, of all the things that you could do with a trial, could I delay a trial with my knowledge and skill set now if I was an attorney? I would have to say, gee, Tim, yeah, I think I really could delay a trial. I would have, you'd schedule things later.
Endless motions.
Yeah,
right?
well, by the way, got an expert witness. Could I schedule him for this week or next? Like every time that it's not just endless motions. So a judge is like a traffic cop in many ways, okay? You go, you stop. This is how we're going to do things. This is the timing of things. And only if that judge is firmly committed, like a drill sergeant, to getting it done by a certain time, will it not get done by that time if there's a concerted effort to delay it, right? If you're making a concerted effort to delay it, the judge would have to be adamant about not allowing it. And typically how this works is there's a lot of comity in these proceedings. In other words, the judge was a lawyer 3 years ago or 6 years ago, right? They work with a lot of lawyers. They don't usually like to hammer down on a lawyer with, scheduling issues. So now everything's out the window with Trump because it's Trump world and who knows what. But so the answer is, gee, Tim, will they go before? Not if Trump and his dedicated team work hard to make it not go before the election. I think that's sort of, sorry for the wishy-washy, but that's where I am with it.
Well, nobody has the answer on it because you're dealing with 3 different jurisdictions. 91, I think, is the latest total number of counts, criminal counts, when you add all 4 cases together. But the intersection of all this with an election campaign, I mean, talk about an X factor. Anybody that says they know how this is going to go is just flat out a liar, because think about the likelihood of potentially disastrous outcomes for both Trump and Joe Biden. For Trump, I mean, constant footage of him surrendering. Supposedly he's going to get a mugshot in Georgia. If that gets out, then that becomes viral in about 2 nanoseconds.
It will run on the cover of LibertyNation.com that day, I can tell you that.
And people will say, can we really elect someone who's likely to be in prison as president? But on the other side, too, you have an extraordinarily enfeebled incumbent who, with each passing day, looks less up to the job of the most powerful person in the world, at least in this country, and with his own tarnished moral credentials, obviously, because they can't bring up the sleaze of Trump without opening that massive Pandora's box of the Biden family enterprises, shall we say. But I sent you a thing right before the podcast, which kind of shows the intersection of the criminal
Electoral
trials.
calendar and the Trump.
It's because the two are intertwined.
Yeah.
To the point where you have to consider both together. For example, I'll give you a quickie on it. August 23rd, which is this coming Wednesday, is the first GOP debate. We don't know whether Trump will be in it or not. Then the 25th is the deadline for him to surrender in Georgia. The 28th is the next hearing in the January 6th case. Then you fast forward to January 2nd of next year, the proposed January 6th trial start date. The 15th of January, Iowa caucuses. March 4th, proposed Georgia trial starting date, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go all the way to the end, but I mean, these things are inexorably intertwined, and there's no way to untangle them. So, I mean, the most fascinating question, I think, arguably in our lifetime politically, is how will voters react to someone who is in terrible legal trouble? Will they see it as the kind of overreach that basically sort of validates everything Trump's been saying about the corruption in the swamp? Or will, on the other hand, say, look, I don't care what I think of him. This guy's just too toxic, even if his policies are stronger than Biden, and Biden is too weak. It'd be better to have someone who at least is too weak rather than someone who's in prison. Okay, that's the burning question that, we've never encountered before. And God knows there's infinite number of directions that it could go from here.
Let's turn our attention, Tim, to the RICO aspect of the case. And there's a lot of confusion out there about why something that's not a crime can be, an element of a crime. And the answer is that, so RICO, how it got started is the government wanted to prosecute organized crime, Italian-American mafia, other sorts, and the really, the good ones, they couldn't prosecute them because how do you get evidence on somebody if there's a mastermind criminal who's directing other people to do crimes?
Can you, by the way, just for reference purposes, because I think I'd say a great majority of people don't know what acronym stands for.
The Racketeer, Influenced, and Corrupt Organizations Act. And it's been amended many times. And it's a famous federal law that was used to take down, most popularly in the media, mob families, mob run stuff. Giuliani wrote it to office as a federal prosecutor going after the Gotti crew. And each state hasn't necessarily its own, but many states have adopted their own kind of model for this, for prosecutors. And prosecutors love it. Why do they love it, Tim? Because you don't have to have Don Corleone on tape ordering Luca Brasi to go cut off Jack Waltz's horse head and put it in his in his bed. Okay,
yeah.
And here's the other thing that you get to do. The guy, if you say to Pete Clemenza to drive Luca Brasi to the airport to go make that trip after Tom Hagen tells you Waltz isn't going to play any games with you, okay?
Yeah.
Then what's going to happen is you get to prosecute the guy who drove the guy to the airport. Even if the guy who drove the guy to the airport didn't know exactly what was going to happen, if he knew that it was part of a greater criminal conspiracy, like the guy at the Staples store, if you tell him to go take this package to X office down the street, he doesn't have to know what's in the package to know that he's delivering office supplies. That's what he does. And the same thing is true for this idea, and that's what the whole RICO thing is. So,
by the way, it's very reassuring to me that you continue to be so conversant about The Godfather with all the details, the names, everything. That's very impressive, Scott.
Tim, with Johnny Fontaine.
I've left you speechless.
When Johnny Fontaine makes a fool out of Waltz, a man in his position cannot afford to look ridiculous, Tim. That's one thing we know for sure.
Good.
Comes in there
Very
with his
good.
olive oil voice and guinea charm. No, not going to do it. All right.
Sweet.
All right, let's go. Are there any other RICO kind of conspiracy? So here's the other thing that's part of if you think about it visually, there is a spoke and wheel conspiracy or hub, which is you get, the people on the outside, the people in the middle, and then the people that connect them. And there's a chain. There's another way to think about it, which is a chain conspiracy. So at the top of the chain, you would have the kingpin. And at the very bottom of the chain, you have the guy standing on a street corner in Kensington, Philadelphia, selling a bag of heroin for $5. Okay.
Right.
But they're both members of the same conspiracy, even though they probably have never even considered the other one's existence or know their name, never met, never came to a direct agreement. But the way the RICO's laws work is you can actually charge the street level drug dealer with the kingpin tonnage, and you can do vice versa. In other words, they're all guilty of all the other things that each one of them has done.
Right.
And if they do anything in order to further the conspiracy, we were talking earlier today about
it's like what you might call collective justice.
Well, anything that you do that helps out the conspiracy is part of it. So we were talking earlier today about VPNs. Well, if you used a VPN for the purpose of concealing your crimes, saying, the purchase of the VPN is now a crime, right? Everything that you do, it's
right.
Prosecutors love RICO, and anybody who is skeptical of government power, wielded, by the way, by both a never-Trumper and a MAGA Josh Hawley, who's not even as smart as Josh Hawley, let's say, like a more malignant Josh Hawley. There was you mentioned the mugshot, and I was tweeting as I do often now on the Uprising's Twitter handle at Podcast Uprising, and there was some lefty put out a thing that it's typical for Georgia criminal defendants to have a mugshot taken. Should Donald Trump be subject to this or afforded some special right? And my comment was they should treat him exactly how they want Joe Biden to be treated by the next Republican-seeking DA, publicity-seeking DA that's going to file charges on him the day that he leaves office.
Right.
Because that's going to happen, right? It's going to be an eye for an eye, and the whole world will be blind. That's where we're headed.
It could be that, if Trump becomes president again, if 45 becomes 47, Joe Biden sure is going to, let's just say he's going to have to watch his back, right? I mean, we know that too.
I hate what the future hold. I think there's two ways.
There's nothing good in it. Nothing good.
Well, there's two ways to think about it. There is one thing that could be good. I want to have optimism a little bit.
Okay.
I actually think that it is important, even when you really don't feel it, to kind of like try to throw a spoonful of sugar into the mix and have a little hope for maybe, Tim, we're not going to wake up tomorrow.
The old expression is a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
I don't think we're going to wake up tomorrow in a republic where people treasure the true power of the grand jury like I would hope that they would and take it away from politically minded prosecutors. But all this is a civics lesson. And I really do think that especially Republicans, certainly many Democrats, but I think more so Republicans needed a lesson, and conservatives, actually. I should have said conservatives, not Republicans. Conservatives, I think, needed a lesson in the harsh manner of justice that we often have in this country. And all the things that have been done to Donald Trump are done to your neighbors all the time. It's just not the front page news.
Right.
So prosecutors who use their political preferences, and maybe it's local politics, maybe it's about zoning or some other petty issue, but using the power of their office to hurt people who haven't committed. We've talked before on this show about common law crimes.
Unmasking of the of the political pollution in the justice system, right?
Yeah. And the lack
Well,
of...
it's just like the pandemic, for as awful as it was, it certainly unmasked the indoctrination of our children into things that used to be considered perverse and are now being normalized by progressives who want to basically
I'm glad you said that. I think that the example is the same.
Of the country.
You could say that the pandemic is revealed a hollowness in our perceived robust, liberty culture, or you could say, and that it's dead, or you could say there are many of us now who, like how much, like I think I opposed a lockdown vigorously when it happened, but the next lockdown is going to be, I'm going to go so much further for my opposition for it, right? I'm going to be that much more motivated.
That's true. No, we've been there before.
I won't forget.
We're not going to go back there again, right?
So you could say that maybe the same thing could be true for this process. And I want to have that possibility held out there. But also, there's the other side, which is they really are playing with fire, I think. If Donald Trump gets sentenced to, by the way, it's a 5-year mandatory minimum, if any of these Georgia convictions, and up to, a lot longer. They try to put Donald Trump in prison for 20 years. What do you think the MAGA, ultra MAGA people are going to do?
I'll just say this, it's unthinkable.
We can't even post this podcast
is essentially
on Twitter, probably, if we reveal not our wishes, but our fears for what could happen, and to this republic, which we both revere. All right, we covered
these are. I mean, people have always said these are dangerous times, but I think we've never seen this level of political balkanization in American history, short of the Civil War.
I heard some celebrity type say recently on Twitter, I'm not being coy about it, I don't know who it was, I don't recall, that this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and democracy's at stake. And I've heard you say before, with at least one election and maybe two, just saying, I'm not coming down on you, that this was the most important election of our lifetime, or an existential election. And I never before really bought into it, but I do now. I do think that and guess what? The way I think about it is not the way those people who said it mean it. In other words, I'm agreeing with them that it is that important. And also we're at odds for, what the result should be.
Well, the level of hyperbole can be measured by when you really consider what's at stake. For example, Bush versus Gore. A lot of people said this is the most important election ever. Think about how much of a difference would it really have made politically, quite a bit, but the direction of the fundamental difference of the country wouldn't be, or when Trump was elected the first time, it was sort of a shot across the bow and people didn't know how to respond. When Obama was elected, it was historic because it was our first black president. And he was going to do things that other Democrats hadn't done. But still, that was not the election of a lifetime because the country didn't fundamentally change. But if you look at what's at stake now, you're seeing that if Trump wins and the left realizes this, the establishment realizes it is effectively at the end of the political establishment as we know it. Because Trump will run roughshod over them. He will politicize things that had previously been careerist, deep into the bureaucracy. And the likes of Joe Biden will be brought low, really, or his type of politics will be brought low to a point that we haven't seen. But on the other hand, if Biden prevails, and we're still going to presume he's a nominee, if Biden prevails, Trump goes to prison, then the reaction that could well ensue would be more violent than anything I think we have seen since the Civil War. So there's so much at stake, and I'd say the single way to put it is the continued existence of the political, really, of the entire establishment as we know it. It would never be the same if Trump is elected for a second time after the degree of persecution that he has had to endure. When you talk about retribution, I think people on the left have never seen anything like what they will see if Trump is elected president again.
I'm cautious about talking about it because it is talk of violence does subject us to deplatforming and censorship. And I don't want to feed that beast, but at the same time, it's sort of like how I feel with the Ukraine war. It's like you're playing with nuclear weapons over there. Like there doesn't seem to be an appreciation for how bad it could get. And if you look at the way that other societies and governments collapse, it's not like everybody saw it coming, a year ahead of time. And something happens and it changes. And I don't want that to happen here. All right.
They're trying to say, sort of the anti-Trump forces are trying to say that essentially it's been boiled down to January 6th is the reason that we cannot ever again allow Donald Trump to be president. Because the corruption charges, all of that, effectively that's been neutralized by everything we've been finding out, the stink emanating from the Hunter Biden laptop. And it gets uglier by the day. Right.
Tim, that laptop has all the hallmarks of a classic Russian disinformation campaign.
Oh, you were one of the 51 that signed that thing, yes. But here's the thing. The Trump people, the anti-Trump people, you look at how far they are going to make sure that Trump doesn't get into office again. The length of their efforts is equal to the degree of their fear of what happens if he gets back in. Because it's not going to be like the first time. This time, Trump knows where the so-called bodies are buried. He knows the bureaucracy. He knows who his friends are. He knows who his enemies are. He's experienced, he's tested, and so he becomes that much more of a danger. It becomes a mortal danger to the forces of the political establishment, the media establishment, on top of a federal
it's
law
an existential question for them. They are motivated to fight harder than ever because the stakes are, it's not the risks, it's the stakes, right? And the stakes are existential.
It's the stakes are existential for them. And I think the Trump people feel it's existential for them as well.
Hell yeah.
So, that this is...
You think they're going to stop at this? No, they're going to... All of them are...
Both sides are seeing this as kind of a final showdown.
Yeah. All right, before we started today's podcast, you, in our very brief pre-production meeting, I said we're probably just going to talk about the indictment. You said, and the debate. And I said... Oh, there's a debate? Should I have?
There was a debate,
and
who won?
And I heard you say earlier during the show that is it next week? There is a GOP. Is that the debate you're referring to that I'm ignorant of?
It's true. Wednesday,
I'm
August
so immersed
23rd.
in these legal wranglings that the political aspect has escaped me entirely. So please set the stage. It's sponsored by who? Where is it going to?
And because I think they're all going to be on. Most of them, anyway, going to be on Fox or
Stacey
Fox
Abrams
Business.
Going to be moderating, or did they actually take a?
She was not available for that. Right. She was unavailable for that day, Scott.
Because that is a thing, by the way, for people who don't know. The history is that Republicans allow themselves a Republican primary debate. Oftentimes, they will pick a lefty, non-Republican reporter who, instead of delving in onto issues that are of great significance to the Republican electorate who is going to choose their candidate. Instead, they'll choose some wedge issue like abortion
Right.
or in order to
Exactly.
where
No, it's true.
Basically harm them in a general election campaign. At least that's the perception, and it doesn't happen to Democrats because
that's what you call it's called the Chris Wallace approach, where he thinks he can establish, even though everybody dislikes him, that he can establish his credibility by asking hard questions of conservatives, right? And this is designed to be, it is in a sense, a beauty pageant for all the candidates in the race, the dozen in the race outside of Trump, the dozen recognized candidates with Ron DeSantis at the head of that ever-enlarging pack. I think, though, that it's finally, I think it's going to be 13 people. You don't know if he's going to attend or not?
Oh, this is about whether... I did see a headline. Excuse me. You know what? I did know there was a debate in the back of my brain because I saw a headline out of the corner of my eye, which was Trump refuses to say he'll support the eventual nominee. Is that the stumbling block to his attendance at the debate?
No, that's one of several.
Okay.
Look, it's Trump, and then it's the dirty dozen, you might call them, of challengers. And Trump is, at last count, almost, if not more than 40 points ahead. Now, any first-year rookie political strategist will tell you if you're 40 points ahead in any race, you don't debate.
Tim, numbers are not my strong suit, and I can even count that high. And
yes.
But
this is Trump, and Trump cannot really tolerate being anything but center stage. It's hard to imagine him tolerating sitting at home watching
them dunk on Trump. Absolutely.
But with Ron DeSantis in the center spot where Trump should be. And would be if he's in the debate.
Okay. So, by the way, this is my political analysis, and you are the LibertyNation.com senior political analyst. So I don't say that it's more sophisticated than your analysis, but we're all out our opinions. And mine is there ain't no way Donald Trump sits home for that. He's going to be where the cameras are. And standing in front of him.
If I was a betting man, and of course, Scott, I am not a betting man at all, but you're supposed to laugh at least.
Okay.
Or as Nancy Pelosi would say, that was an applause line. Did you hear that? That was an applause line.
Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah. Now,
you were going to announce your wager if you were to make one.
It is that Trump would compete because the downside is too great for him to allow himself to be some kind of punching bag. Because, of course, here's the thing that I think, and I was thinking this earlier, the reason that I'm going to say that he probably will is that Trump is unique among politicians in the fact that he will not only regularly, but most enjoyably punch down.
Right.
In other words, most politicians say you don't
never mention the guy who polls at 1%. You don't even say his name. You pretend he doesn't exist.
He'll come right
full on. If that guy says something about Trump, Trump will come back. Trump would. I'm not even joking. I think that if my next door neighbor tweeted some anti-Trump thing, there's an odds-on chance that Trump could reply to say you're stupid and shut up.
You're stupid. Yeah.
Right.
You're stupid.
Well, here's the exit question for you as we consider the debate. Is there any hope there for DeSantis or one of the other? I mean, that's their hope is they're going to break out, right? Can one of them manage it or?
I think there is one thing and one thing only that can stop Trump from getting the nomination, and that is a health crisis. Because look, you could say, well, something could happen. Well, what more could happen than being indicted 4 times?
Right.
So there's little to no hope. Basically, I think you're looking at a small field of potential VPs who will be basically in on a beauty pageant to display their wares to Trump for being number 2. I think Trump has already said, when asked about Tim Scott, he said, very interestingly, Trump said, Tim Scott is overqualified to be my VP, meaning
I'm not going to pick
that would be an obvious choice.
Oh, I
Right.
thought you meant like I'm not going to pick him because he's overqualified. Okay.
I don't know. I think quite
Right.
the opposite. That it says that, well, yeah, of course. I think he's sending out a little hint.
Got
Used
it.
to think that DeSantis could be an ideal running mate, but
Two
no
against each
way.
other. They will
No
never
way.
exist on the same
Nikki
page.
Haley is too suspiciously anti-Trump within Republican confines.
Right.
Um, the guy who's getting all the juice now, and rightfully so, because he's truly impressive, is Vivek Ramaswamy. He is rising within the context of, the crumbs that are left
Okay, so
after Trump's
it's still crumbs.
Trump's
He's not.
50,
Is he in double
60%.
digits, Vivek?
He's just broken double digits
Oh, okay.
for the
Well,
first
that's
time.
something.
He's clearly in third place behind DeSantis, but
For a
he
guy who's
started
never
at zero.
held a high office
No.
once in his life. That's
highly successful entrepreneur, and he has quite a following, and he's getting a lot of juice. I suspect he's going to do very well in the debates. He's gotten really good press. He's smart. He's a thought leader, but he will take people on directly. He's intellectually honest. I think he's very impressive within that Republican. I think he's the only one that has really distinguished himself because, frankly, all the headlines are going to Trump. No one else has a chance to even, get any kind of traction because it's all Trump all the time. Ramaswamy is the only one who has. And
If I were
he's certainly auditioning to be VP because, again, he's an entrepreneur. He's a political newcomer. He's an outsider. He's a person of color. It makes sense. Tim Scott, in my view, probably makes the most sense politically.
There's one
Trump.
question that I would ask, and this actually you could argue is a kind of lefty question for a Republican panel, but I really think it's the one thing I'm interested in hearing about. Will you now commit to pardoning Donald Trump for any federal crimes related to January 6th indictment or the documents indictment, Mr. Candidate?
Yes, Ms. Haley, Senator Scott. Yeah, right.
I want to hear that.
Yes. But look, just because it's for conservatives, it's by conservatives for conservatives, this debate, doesn't mean that the candidates shouldn't be challenged with difficult questions. They just shouldn't be gotcha questions. And that's not a gotcha question. That's a legitimate question. Would you pardon him if you were elected? That's a legitimate question because it involves a number of different things you would need to explain, which would also be very revealing.
From my lips to the moderators here, and we'll see what happens. Thank you so much for sticking with us. And people will be able to access your coverage of the debate, which I assume will appear the morning thereafter on LibertyNation.com. Tim, thanks for joining us once again.
Thank you, Scott. Look forward to future weeks. We're just getting started with the presidential election. It's my Super Bowl season.
Send bourbon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We are the Uprising. Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at LibertyNation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.
That's it for this edition of The Uprising. Remember to hit Liberty Nation News for original articles, LN Radio, and our signature television program, The Conservative 5. Just go to LibertyNation.com on your browser or hit Rumble, YouTube, or check out our Liberty Nation News Roku channel. I'm Scott Cosenza. Thanks for joining The Uprising. This program is a production of LibertyNation.com, where truth is making a comeback.